Moving to the Oregon coast is one of the most unique relocation experiences that anybody can have because the Oregon coast is enormous. So dialing down how to find the perfect home in the perfect area is no small task. In this video, we're going to talk about a framework for how you can find the perfect home on the Oregon coast. All that starts now. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Clem with the Oregon Relocation Team coming to you from the Oregon coast. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to think about approaching your Oregon coast home search. So like I mentioned, it's one of the more unique relocation experiences that somebody can have because the Oregon coast is a very unique market. It's relatively isolated from more populated areas of the state. It's divided by a coastal range where you have a lot of Western Oregon, that Interstate 5 corridor where you have Portland, Salem, and Eugene down the line is separated by the coastal range to the west, and then you have all these towns, dozens of little towns smattered throughout this 363-mile coastline. So you'll get a ton of consistency from Astoria to the north all the way down to Brookings to the south. Obviously there's a ton of differences as well, so finding the right area, the right region, the right town, and the right home for you can be a little bit tricky. So what are the biggest considerations? Well, before we go any further, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap that little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. Okay, so first and foremost, I think population is the biggest consideration when you look at what town to move to on the Oregon coast. Now, population in and of itself doesn't make an enormous difference necessarily, and when you look at the population of a town on the Oregon coast, it doesn't nearly tell the whole story. So some of the smallest towns are the most popular and bustling and busy tourist areas, where some of the larger towns, or some of the towns with the largest populations, are more laid back. Everywhere on the Oregon coast gets its fair share of tourism. So especially during the warmer months in the year, you're going to get a lot of people coming in and out, a lot of people traveling to the area, and a lot of people visiting the beaches, visiting the restaurants. It's going to get more busy overall, regardless of where you are. But again, not all towns are created equal, and evaluating population, again, doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, but you can look at the population of a town and start to work backwards a little bit in terms of what you can expect as far as the culture, the lifestyle, what it's going to be like day to day, what's offered in the area. So obviously there's going to be more amenities, more services, something we'll talk about later in this video. Those things are going to be offered commensurate with the population of an area, at least to some degree. So the larger the population, the more of those things are there to support that population. And so we've talked about it in a lot of videos. There are about a half a dozen towns that are sitting right around 10,000 people, and then you have Coos Bay and North Bend being the population center, the largest, most populated area on the Oregon coast. But Astoria, Seaside, Tillamook, Lincoln City, Newport, Florence, again, Coos Bay, North Bend, and then down to Brookings and Harbor. These are those population centers, and these are those areas, those towns on the Oregon coast that are right about 10,000 people, more or less. Now, in between those towns, there are a lot of smaller villages and smaller communities that, again, can be really busy and really bustling. Cannon Beach comes to mind, for example. There's a lot of people always walking around Cannon Beach and visiting Cannon Beach. It's really easy to get to from Portland, so it's a very popular vacation destination. It's a very popular day trip destination. So about 1,500 people live there, but you're going to get a lot of people in and out, even in the winter, in the colder months. Smaller towns like Gearhart or Depot Bay or Nesquin, these are also, these are going to be areas where you have 1,000 people, 1,200 people, maybe less than 1,000 people in the case of Nesquin, for example, that especially in the warmer months and the more popular time of year to visit the Oregon coast, these are going to be really kind of bustling and busy areas, although they're very small communities overall. So again, you can look at population town by town, doesn't really paint the whole story, but if it's a town of 10,000 people, there's going to be more there, again, as far as services and things that you would need day to day, than a town of a few hundred people or even a couple thousand people. I think one way you can look at this is by county. So there's 5 primary counties on the Oregon coast. There are 2 counties further east that extend to the coastline, so Lane County, which is where Eugene is, extends west just a little bit, and Florence actually sits in Lane County. Similarly, and just south of that, you have Douglas County, where you have Roseburg, extends out a little bit, and then you have Reedsport on the coast in Douglas County. But outside of that, you have Clatsop County furthest to the north. Clatsop County has about 42,000 people. You have Tillamook County south of that, 28,000 people, so about 2/3 of what Clatsop County has just to the north. And then you have Lincoln County south of Tillamook County, which has 50,000 people and two large towns, Newport and Lincoln City, in Lincoln County. So Lincoln County is going to be probably the most dense and most populated feeling county, although you go through Lane County, then Douglas County, and then you get into Coos County, where you have Coos Bay, North Bend, and Bandon, and there's going to be over 60,000 people in Coos County. Actually, about 65,000 people in this area. So Coos County is the most populated county on the Oregon coast, but in a lot of ways has more of a rural feel, even though Coos Bay and North Bend are, it's a larger area. It feels more like a rural community in some ways than some of the more kind of true coastal beach towns that are even larger, like Seaside or Lincoln City, for example. And then you get down into Curry County, which is the most isolated and least populated county on the Oregon coast. And there's about 24,000 people in Curry County. So I think breaking this down county by county gives you a little bit more perspective, where you have Clatsop County, which is smaller, but has a higher population, about 42,000 people. Tillamook has a little bit more of a rural feel, but still really close to Portland, right? And then you have Lincoln County. Clatsop County and Lincoln County are probably the two counties that are going to feel the busiest, the most populated, has a ton of the tourism, and a lot of towns throughout. The next really big consideration is part of what I was alluding to when you look at the size of an area, as far as the amount of people there and the services and amenities that are needed to support a given population. So looking at what services and amenities are offered in a particular area is really going to give you an idea of what it's going to be like and how far you need to travel from time to time to get to certain things, whether it be shopping or medical care, veterinary, boarding, maybe if you have a dog, for example, certain types of activities, which is something we'll get to a little bit later in this video. But when you're looking at being in a town that has a few hundred people, and the next town north is 15-20 miles, next town south is 15-20 miles, there's going to be nothing to your east except coastal range, you can feel pretty isolated, and you're going to find yourself traveling out of those areas quite a bit to get things that you're going to need. Again, everybody's a little bit different, and I think to some degree a lot of people are moving to the Oregon coast to be in an area that offers a more laid-back lifestyle. And I think it's pretty well known in talking to a lot of people that we work with moving to the Oregon coast that there's going to be some sacrifices, especially compared to what you're used to and where you're coming from. Most people are coming from a more populated area, and they're looking for a quieter, more laid-back lifestyle on the Oregon coast. And so a sacrifice with that is there's going to be less, again, of things that you would need day to day, but moving to a town of 5,000 people, 10,000 people on the Oregon coast is different than living in a town of, 2, 5, 10,000 people, say on the outskirts of a major metro area, for example. So if you look at like Portland or Eugene in Oregon, there's plenty of small towns surrounding the metro area, and you can get into the metro area or kind of to the next suburb into the metro area, or get into Eugene, for example, and have a lot better access to certain things. Whereas if you're on the Oregon coast, you might live in a really small town and you're going up to like Lincoln City, for example, which only has about 10,000 people. Now, getting over into Western Oregon, I mean, you're at least an hour out from anywhere, really, realistically, like 90 minutes out from a Salem or Eugene or Portland or Roseburg. And if you're all the way south, like down in Brookings, it's going to be at least a couple hours to get over into, say, Medford, which is the next largest, most populated area, all the way in Southern Oregon. So point being, the amenities and the services that are offered in your immediate area should really be a big consideration, especially if there is something that you need in particular that is less common, or something that not everybody needs, but something that you want or need access to on a more regular basis. Now, if you are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, and if you want to talk more about what these towns look like, what's offered in these different towns as far as services, amenities, you name it. Give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video and schedule a Zoom call with us. We've helped so many people relocate to the Oregon coast from all around the country and the world, and we would love to help with that process. So we can definitely connect and expand on all of these things that we're talking about in this video. All right, the next thing is going to be to consider the landscape. So the topography on the Oregon coast is pretty consistent. You know, say if you take any 20-mile stretch of the Oregon coast, you're going to have peaks and valleys and highs and lows and rivers and lakes and, you know, kind of everything in between. But in your immediate area where your house sits, again, a common theme is what you want access to within a 10 or 15 minute drive is going to be a big consideration, and the landscape will dictate that to some degree. And I say that too in the context of outdoor activities. So most people moving to the Oregon coast are not moving here just because it is a more quiet, laid back lifestyle. That's for sure part of it, but it's also the scenery and the natural beauty and all of the things that you have access to outdoors, whether that is just being outside in and of itself or specific outdoor activities. And so on the Oregon coast, of course, you have the ocean and the beaches, but you also have the coastal range. You know, you have mountains, you have lakes and rivers and ponds, so you have fishing. I mean, there's boating, paddleboarding, a lot of things that you can do outdoors, hiking, biking trails. So, you know, when you look at the things that you intend to do as far as outdoor activities, again, some areas are going to be better than others for specific things like surfing, or if it's fishing, or even things like beachcombing, for example. There's areas with much larger, more vast beaches where it's a lot easier to get out, do the beachcombing, or just walk on the beach, where there's areas where there's much smaller beaches and beaches are in less abundance. So from the most leisure of activities to the most extreme outdoor activities, or the Oregon coast really has it all. But where you live, again, is going to determine, you know, how easy it is to get to certain things and to be able to access certain points that are going to cater more to what you're looking for specifically. Now, the other end of that too, it's not just outdoor activities. I mean, part of it is the scenery. So if you want more kind of a flat, long, or big horizon, there's going to be areas where you can get that, like Tillamook, for example, is this, you know, huge valley, you know, where you have all these rivers flowing into the Tillamook Bay. And if you look east, it's really flat for quite a ways, and it's beautiful. You see the coastal range in the distance, and you have these really big sweeping views kind of in every direction that you look. Now, there's going to be other areas on the Oregon coast, say like Yachats, for example, where you have Cape Perpetua right there, you know, just to the south and to the east a little bit, and you have, you know, the mountain range, the mountains really kind of butting up right up against the town. In fact, a lot of the residential development in the town is up on the hill. So you don't have, you know, such a vast, you know, kind of 360 degree view, but it's also, you know, it's beautiful in its own right, and it's going to look and feel very different. Yachats feels like this kind of, you know, small, cozy little village, you know, right in between the ocean and the mountain. And then an area like Tillamook, for example, you know, much bigger, sprawling views. So there's going to be a lot of differences there regarding landscape, and that should be a big consideration as far as being able to put yourself in an area that you're really envisioning. All right, another really big consideration is going to be things to do and activities. And we talked about outdoor activities, so a lot of what I just talked about, you know, is part of that consideration. If there's a lot of things you want to do in the way of outdoors, again, fishing, paddleboarding, beachcombing, whatever it is, hiking, you know, where you end up regionally is really going to make a big difference. But most people aren't just engaging in outdoor activities all the time necessarily. So a lot of people that we talk to end up wanting to be at least close enough to a more populated area where they can get involved in the community, or where they can go out to restaurants, or, you know, go shopping and do certain things, and not have to drive an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours to the next largest town, say in the valley. And there's going to be towns that offer a lot more to do in town than others, for sure. Even if you're in a smaller town, you know, that doesn't really have like a downtown area or shopping or restaurants and things like that. A little village, again, like in Nesquin, we talked about Yachats, just a couple little restaurants there, for example, you can still get to the next largest town in 10 or 15 minutes. And for a lot of people, that's going to be sufficient. So you don't necessarily have to live in one of these larger towns, you know, those half a dozen or so towns of 10,000 plus people. But there are areas, there are towns, smaller towns that you live where it's less convenient to get to some of these larger towns. So not only is it going to be really difficult to get to a Eugene or a Salem or a Medford or Roseburg or Portland, but it's also going to be less convenient to get to the next largest town on the coast. When we talked about Yachats, I mean, that definitely comes to mind. I mean, you have to go 45 minutes south at least to get to Florence, and then you have to go really about 45 minutes, 40 minutes north to get to Newport. So Reedsport, too, like south of Florence, I mean, it's going to be pretty tough to get up into Florence or down into North Bend, for example. So there's these sections of the Oregon coast that are going to feel more isolated and by default might feel more boring. There might just be less to do and get involved in, whether that is being involved in the community or, again, just getting out, kind of hitting the town a little bit, which I know isn't necessarily the top priority for people, but even if it's on a monthly basis, if you want to get out, go shopping, get lunch, whatever it may be, there's going to be a pretty big difference depending on where you end up. All right, another really big consideration is proximity. So I think with a lot of the categories that we've talked to up to this point, proximity, I've alluded to that. It's been part of the context, right, as far as things to do or services and amenities that you need access to, or the landscape and outdoor activities, things that you would want to get out and do outside. So your proximity overall in and of itself, you can look at in the context of how far is the next biggest town, how far is the hospital, how far is my favorite park or hiking area, how far is my favorite beach, how far are the best rivers to fish, for example. So looking at where you are on a map and what's around you ultimately is going to be incredibly important as far as shaping how it's going to be day to day. And not just day to day, but also from time to time when you want to get out and do certain things or need to access certain things. So we've talked about proximity in the context of all of that, but there's also kind of a strategy that we really encourage people have when they are searching for a home on the Oregon coast, because these are small towns. We talked about the population. By default, they have a small housing stock. There's not a ton of residential development going on the Oregon coast, not nearly enough to support the demand. So when somebody is considering a move to the Oregon coast, maybe they're getting more serious about it, maybe they're narrowing down areas that they like, we really encourage people to have, 2, 3, 4, maybe half a dozen areas even that could be a potential landing spot for them. And you'll find when you start looking at these towns on a town by town basis, yeah, there's going to be some differences, but there's also going to be a ton of similarities too, as far as what you get and what the experience is going to be like. So if you could narrow it down to 2, 3, 4 towns at least, you give yourself a much better chance to end up in a place that feels comfortable for you. And when we look at proximity, a lot of that is not necessarily making a sacrifice, but when you say, this is my top town, I really love this town, I want to spend time here, this is the area that we have our sight set on. Well, there's going to be a town just north of that. There's going to be a town just south of that. And if you end up in either of those towns that are close to the area that is the top priority for you, you still have easy enough access to the area that is really the top priority for you. So you can use this example all the way down the line on the Oregon coast, but let's take Newport, for example. Newport is a wonderful town, kind of has everything. And it's a busy, bustling area, one of the top tourism areas on the Oregon coast. So some people either like it or don't like it for that reason. But let's take Newport, for example. So if you absolutely love Newport and you would love nothing more to land in Newport, but nothing's coming up, the right house isn't coming up, and you're looking and more time passes. Well, you have Depot Bay just to the north. You have Waldport just to the south. About, call it 15 minutes in either direction. And if you expand your radius to the next town north, say Depot Bay, or the next town south, Waldport, you start to give yourself more of a chance, more of an opportunity to end up in the region, in the area more or less that you want to be, and be able to get to, in this example, Newport on a regular basis, no problem. So when we talk about proximity, I think that's really something that you can incorporate into your strategy and saying, okay, I know that I like this town. what's this town to the north like? What's this town to the south like? Could I end up here? And does that satisfy, what I'm hoping to accomplish as far as where I want to be moving to the Oregon coast? All right, next and finally, it's going to be really important to understand what the real estate market is like. And you can look at that as a whole on the Oregon coast, but things really start to deviate, from the mean as you break it down more town by town. I mean, there's going to be towns that are wildly expensive and probably, way more expensive than where you're coming from, or at least what you're expecting. And there's going to be a lot of towns that are going to be really, really more on the affordable side of things, at least when you compare it to the rest of Oregon or the West Coast or living near the ocean. The most expensive real estate markets in the United States are on the coast, right? So, there are some towns on the Oregon coast that are surprisingly affordable, at least when you put it in that context. And so I think that is a big draw overall for a lot of people when they're moving to the Oregon coast. They look at home prices and they say, wow, I can get a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square foot home for $450,000, or I can get a 3,000 square foot 4 or 5 bedroom home, that might have a little bit of an ocean view for $850,000, $900,000. So I kind of hesitate throwing out random numbers like that, because I know, across the country, depending on where you're coming from, there's going to be a really big range. But if you look at, say, probably like anywhere in California, for example, that same larger, somewhat oceanfront property that I was mentioning, I mean, that's going to be at least $1.5, $2 million, for example. So it's all relative, right? But either way, I think there's a lot of relative affordability on the Oregon coast. There's also a lot of wildly expensive towns, and there's a lot in the middle as well. So going into your Oregon coast home search and understanding what the market is like in a particular county, let's say, or even within that county in a particular town, because say if we look at like Clatsop County, for example, Astoria, Seaside, I'm going to lean a little bit more on the affordable side, all things considered. You have Gearhart right in the middle of those communities. It's going to lean a little bit more on the expensive side. And then, on the south side of Clatsop County, you have Cannon Beach and Arch Cape, the most expensive area on all of the Oregon coast, where in Astoria or Seaside, the median sale price might be like $450,000, and the median sale price in Cannon Beach or Arch Cape might be $900,000 or $1 million, for example. So there's a really big contrast even between towns that are separated by 15, 20, 25 miles. So what prices look like in a particular town, obviously that's a big consideration. I think for most people, budget is the driving factor. Obviously we want to take all of your preferences into consideration. There's always going to be sacrifices somewhere, and regardless of where that is, I think people use what they want to spend and then use that as kind of the driving force as far as narrowing down what areas are going to fit into that budget. But beyond budget, I think it's really important to know what the inventory is like in a particular area and how competitive it is in a particular area. So there's really, really small towns that are in high demand, small housing stock. Homes are going to go very, very quickly, at least properties that are turnkey and don't need a ton of work. There's our areas that have relatively high demand, but a pretty decent housing stock too. You also see this kind of have and have nots, where there's this category of property or certain segment of properties that will sell very quickly, kind of no matter what, if it's in good shape, if it's newer, if it has an ocean view or beach access. And then there's a lot of homes, there's a lot of different types of properties in all towns on the Oregon coast that if they are a fixer-upper or need a lot of work, if it's cosmetic issues or major issues, maybe you're close to the highway, maybe you don't have the beach view or beach access, those homes can sit on the market for a very, very long time. And even sometimes properties that are right on the beach or have a beach view but need some work, those properties can sit for a long time too. So there's a lot of subtle nuances as far as evaluating what the demand is like in a particular town. We can look at data, we can look at trends, we can look at what's going on in the market today, and that's typically what we'll do with people when we start talking about specific areas. But having an understanding of that is not just important in terms of what your home search is going to be like, but having some context or understanding of that is going to give you a much better idea in terms of what to expect, not just during your home search, but also when you're ready to start putting in offers. Is the expectation that we're going to be competing against multiple offers in every scenario? Usually not, but if that's going to be the case, we want to know that up front. So that's what we're here for. That's something that we can talk to you more about, not just what the market's been like up to today up to this point, but also what we can expect, as things play out over weeks and months, depending on what your timeline looks like and everything. So if you want to have that conversation, if you want to learn more about the Oregon coast market, if you want to learn more about narrowing down your home search by area or by property type, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can dig into all of that. Now, if this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.